We are here because we did not believe them when they told us our rage was not ladylike. We did not believe them when they said our violence goes too far. We did not believe them when they said the hatred that we feel for our enemies is not godlike. They say that to women like us because they know what happens when we are free.
Welcome back to Black Girl Watching, where we break down your favorite films and TV shows. I'm Brooke Obie, film critic, writer, editor, and screenwriter.
And I'm Danielle, a writer, editor, and cultural critic who loves watching Black art. And we are super excited today to talk about Lovecraft Country episode 7. We've been waiting for a long time to see what's up with Hippolyta, and we finally find out.
Yes, so join in on our conversation by using the hashtag Black Girl Watching on Twitter and Instagram, and feel free to tweet us at BLKGRL Watching to share your thoughts, ask your questions, share your theories. We want to hear all that stuff. You can also check out our website, blackgirlwatching.com, where we'll have some additional notes and some links that you can check out later as well and listen to future episodes.
Yeah, and if you are listening on whatever platform you're listening on, please give us a 5-star rating. We've had so many. I happened to go on Apple Podcasts earlier this week, and I saw that we had quite a few 5-star ratings that I wasn't expecting, and we had some reviews. So if you are listening on, Apple or Spotify or Google or Stitcher or whatever podcast platform, please hit us with that 5-star rating. And just let us know what you love about the show, because that's how we get more people to listen, and that's how we get picked up in bigger things. So give us a shout.
And I'm really excited because we were already doing big things, because we've got the best special guest that you could possibly get, the star of episode 7, We have Aunjanue Ellis in the building with us today. We're super excited to get into this episode and what it all means. So let's start off and to talk about what our first reactions were. What did you think when you saw this episode, Britni?
Before we get into the first reactions, just know that we are here for all the spoilers. So if you have not seen episode 7, if you have not seen any of the episodes up to episode 7, we are talking about everything. So we have spoilers. We are getting into it. And just know, if you haven't seen it, pause the podcast, go watch the episodes, and then come back to us. But my first reaction, it was finally Hippolyta. Hippolyta, I think the last time we really saw her was in, episode 4? When everybody was journeying to Boston to go on this Indiana Jones type adventure to try to find Samuel Braithwaite's papers. And Hippolyta, at the end of that episode, she says, she already knows that they're lying to her about how George died. And so she takes a detour to try to figure out what happened. And so she heads to Lovecraft Country. And so they're, because of our experience so far in Lovecraft Country, it's like, oh my God, what's going to happen with Hippolyta? So we finally see what happens with Hippolyta in this episode, and I was totally here for it. And it just made it 1,000 times better that we got to talk to Aunjanue Ellis about this episode. But yeah, I was here for it. How about you?
No, I absolutely loved all the parts that were about Hippolyta. I really felt like this was Misha Green and also the co-writer of this episode, Shannon Houston. I felt like this was their love letter to Black women.
Right.
And this was a week from hell for Black women. I mean, especially, because we're kind of always in this place of consistent marginalization and dehumanization as Black women in this country and around the world. And so this week in particular just felt extra heavy. This was the week that, people have been calling for justice for Breonna Taylor in a manner that required the cops to arrest themselves, which, they're just never going to do. And so they actually came out and finally said it this week. The grand jury did not indict the killers of Breonna Taylor, those police officers, essentially got off scot-free. I mean, with the slap on the wrist for shooting holes into the drywall, instead of any charges being brought for actually killing Breonna Taylor. And that was a black man. That was the Attorney General Danielle Cameron, who essentially said she had no life to defend, and that there was nothing that needed to be done through the criminal justice system to bring peace to her family, to bring peace to the millions of black women who are endangered by police as well. And so to have, that happen on top of Tory Lanez dropping this album where he's like dissing Megan Thee Stallion after he allegedly, shot her in the foot and is not really facing any consequences for that. It's been a hard week for black women. It's been a really hard week. So I think to end the week, or to begin the next week, however you want to look at Sunday, with this letter from Misha Green and Shannon Houston saying that our rage is righteous and that we have a right to be angry and we have a right to express that anger. We have a right to be violent if it requires violence. We have a right to destroy if destruction is required. All the things that Hippolyta essentially says in that speech that she gives to her fellow Amazonian warriors, I thought was really, really important, because we are often told as black people who, are shaped by the Christian faith in this country, that it's not godly for us to be angry, that, wanting revenge.
Turn the other
exactly.
cheek.
Wanting revenge against, white people who have caused so much damage to our lives, to the lives of our ancestors throughout generations in this country and all over the world is, ungodly. This was a reclamation. So I found a lot of peace. I found a lot of joy in that, and seeing Hippolyta being able to express everything. She goes on this journey from joy to rage to love to, unboundedness, and gets to, explore all these areas of herself, and they're all validated. And, she starts off going on this journey to find answers about George and ends up finding answers about herself. And I just think that is so beautiful.
Yeah, the boundlessness of black girl or black woman genius is on full display in this episode, and we are here for it. And I'm so glad that that's something that when we spoke with Aunjanue, that she really hit on and talked about and articulated, like, yeah, we have a right to be angry. We have a right to be pissed off because we've been looked over. We haven't been protected as black women. We have been idealized as like, oh, strong black women is some sort of concept or idea. But when it comes to the flesh and bone women like Megan Thee Stallion, like Breonna Taylor, like Latasha Harlins, there's a really good documentary up on Netflix now about Latasha Harlins, who was killed in the 90s here in Los Angeles. And that was something that was really formative in my young years, because she was killed by a store owner here in LA, and she went to high school with my older brother, and she was killed like a mile away from my house. So all of these things have been building for black women. It's kind of like old hat right now, where people say, oh, the most disrespected person in America is the black woman, but we're often disrespected by those who claim to also love us. So I really appreciated that conversation that we had with Aunjanue, and I really appreciated this episode. And I think we should get in a recap.
Yes, let's get into it. So, like you already mentioned, we last saw Hippolyta and Diana in episode 4. They turned their car around from heading back to Chicago to go to Lovecraft Country once Hippolyta found George's atlas, or she saw Diana playing with George's atlas, and it had a circle around Lovecraft Country. And so she's going there looking for answers. And so the episode essentially opens 3 days after she's come back from Lovecraft Country. Apparently she went there. She saw the lodge of the Order of the Ancient Dawn that Tick disintegrated with magic and the help of his ancestor Hannah back in episode 2. And so she's rummaging through all the rubble, and she sees Diana's comic that she made for her dad. And so Hippolyta knows that George was there and confirms her suspicions that Tick and Montrose and Letty, they've been lying to her all along about what happened to George. So she's back at home and she's trying to figure out how to open Hiram's Orrery that she took from Letty's house back in episode 3. And she thinks that it's going to give her answers about George's death. So she's this moment of like frustration and disappointment and not being able to figure out how to open this orrery up with the equations and everything that she's been doing. She like lays down and, kind of pats the spot where George would sleep in their bed, and she apologizes to him because she can't figure it out, and then gets a stroke of genius, figures out how to open it, and then unlocks the orrery and finds a key and some coordinates inside. Mm-hmm. But then we get to your part, Britni, because we find out how exactly this potion works that turned Ruby into a white woman and that turned Christina into William. So
yeah, we learned that I guess William and Dell, who's the woman who's Dell / Hillary / White Ruby, like I like to call her, they're dead, but she's using their blood to make these potions, to be able to shapeshift between all of these different forms. And I mean, for me, I still don't know why Ruby is even fooling with Christina at this point. Like, I don't get it when Ruby is like, tell me everything and I want to know. Like, I get that you've been deceived. I don't understand, like we mentioned last episode, I don't understand her allegiance or whatever to William. Mm-mm. I don't understand why she cares about him at all. I don't understand why she cares about these crazy ass people at all, right? Like, I just don't get it, but maybe Ruby's curiosity will help her sister in the end, but I'm still dubious, and we can talk about that later on.
Yeah.
I'm still dubious that Ruby is not Ruby, because we've already established in this show that shape-shifting and using people's blood, I guess, is possible. So like, I don't put it past Christina to like kill Ruby, like kill real Ruby, Black Ruby, and then have her in the basement and using her blood to make a Ruby potion. You know what I mean? Like, yeah. I don't trust it. Like, and as we see later in the episode, like, I'm looking at that like, is this real Ruby or this is like Rachel Dolezal Ruby? Like, what's
exactly.
happening here?
And it makes me uncomfortable too. I think this is one of the places where the show is making some missteps, I would say. I mean, having Christina transform into William, all of these things, of course, these are not in the book at all. It's actually very, very different from the book. In the book, Samuel Braithwaite has a son. He doesn't have a daughter. He has a son named Caleb. And that's, I guess, who Christina is replacing in the show. And so having a potion that kind of turns a woman into a man, and she's parading around and she's having sex with Ruby as a man. It's not really addressing that. I mean, like, it just kind of, it brings up a lot of space for transphobia. I don't know. I think this is something that requires a lot more care, and I don't know that has actually happened in this situation, because it's messy, and it leaves too many questions, and it leaves too much space, I think, for harm to come to trans people in these images. And yeah, I don't like it.
Yeah. And in addition to that, it also opens up these other possibilities about the story that we're presented. Like, I'm not sure if we're supposed to question if this is real Ruby or fake Ruby when her and Letty make up. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I guess we'll have to see at the end of the season, if Christina has killed Ruby and put her in the basement and taken her blood and, assumed her body. But like, I don't think that's what they're doing, but
I don't think it's what they're doing either.
Yeah, but because they've set up this thing, it opens our questioning, right? Like, I don't trust Ruby
Well, we shouldn't.
She has not proven to be trustworthy. Like
she isn't.
She has not proven to be trustworthy because she fell really quickly for William. She is not proven to be trustworthy because she's listening to Christina's bullshit. Like, she seems to be eating it all up. And I'm just like, come on, Ruby.
And that's why why Christina doesn't have to kill her. Because, I mean, I don't know. I think she kind of found herself, I don't know, an Omarosa figure, you know, that you can give some, you know, it's a kind of black person, which, you know, I don't know. I felt like Ruby had a lot of potential.
Like a Ben Carson?
Yeah, I felt like she had a lot of potential. I was just trying to think of a woman. Candace Owens.
Yeah.
I felt like Ruby had a lot of potential.
A Diamond and Silk.
Or something,
Ruby.
Yes.
And you know what? I really hope that's not. I really hope in the end of the season, this is not like Ruby is not the Diamond and Silk of the season. You know what I mean? Like, she's not the Omarosa. I mean, even Omarosa, she came out the other side and started talking some truth after she was fired.
So that's why I said Omarosa, because I do feel like there is, like, they have set Ruby up to be somebody who can play both sides.
Yeah.
And I don't like that. I mean, like, you know, especially with her being, you know, the young dark-skinned woman in the group, like, I don't like her being the turncoat because, you know, life is harder for her. I mean, I just know so many other dark-skinned black women in our communities who have been so responsible for our community surviving.
And
you know,
liberation.
I don't. Yes, exactly. I don't think that it's necessary.
Like,
that's what I'm saying.
Yeah,
there's no
Claudette
reason
Colvin.
for this.
Like, there's so many. You know, I mean, we don't have to go into that. This is not a historical podcast, but there are so many black women who have been on the front lines, who have been working silently, who have been working in a way that we've been marginalized, which is something else that I really appreciate Aunjanue Ellis talking about. Like, black women in general have been working for our liberation, and to see this character of Ruby so far, I am dubious for lack of a better word. Like, I hope she makes a hard turn to come around, but like right now, it's dark and hell is
we
hot.
just don't know. Yeah, we don't know what the situation is with Ruby, and that's the thing, like, that I don't like. If Letty's going to be set up as the kind of heroine of this story, that gives space for Ruby to also be kind of a sympathetic villain.
Right.
And I really, really don't like that choice. I don't like it at all. But
I hope they're both heroines in the end. They seem to, in this episode, have, there's still some mistrust between them, but they seem to have sort of a connection when they're talking about, Letty apologizes for not telling her. She still lies. So she apologizes about not telling her about the inheritance from the mom. And Ruby says, like, well, I never heard our mother apologize for anything, so you're not like her. Like, you're not exactly like her. And they have a moment, and they're on the road to reconciliation, but it's very, very tenuous.
And I think that's the reason why, too, that it's very clear that she is Ruby and not somebody else, because at no point during the Hillary episode did she feel like she had some sort of memories of some other person other than herself. She was still herself. She was just in Hillary's skin. And same with Christina. When she was in William's skin, they were lovers. So she knows William's story. So all the things that she was telling Ruby as William, those were things that, William had told her, things that it wasn't like she had absorbed his, brain or anything like that, or his memories or anything. So I do think the fact that she's saying this, they're having this moment and they're talking about their mom, and she's able to do this without any sort of issues, I think is indicative of the fact that it is actually Ruby. And again, I think it's, there are Black women who are not supporting Megan Thee Stallion.
Hello.
Like there are the kind of Black women who will be more likely to buy into white supremacy and like Ruby has been doing for a while, and into anti-blackness. It's definitely possible. I hate this for Ruby, but anyway, they both take an opportunity at this moment when they're trying to heal or whatever, to not acknowledge the secrets that they both know. They still don't really trust each other. And maybe that's for the best, because we see, as they're talking and they're joking, they're kind of joking around and everything like that. Letty starts to get a little nauseous because she's like smelling the cooking that Ruby is doing. And Ruby jokes that she's pregnant. And Letty did have a dream from Hannah about being pregnant. So Hannah, the ancestor of Tick, who Tick also saw in episode 2 that helped him, same vision, the lodge is on fire. Hannah's she's pregnant, standing in the doorway with a giant book in her hand, and she's leading Tick out the door, and that's how Tick is able to escape in episode 2, and he has the same dream. I believe it was episode 3, except this time he catches on fire with the lodge. And so Letty has the exact same dream in this episode, except she sees Hannah as well, leading her out the door. She's chasing behind her. She stops. She sees that she's pregnant, as that Letty is also pregnant, and then Letty catches on fire. And so, it's possible that Letty is actually pregnant by Tick.
Yeah, I figured she was after that after that dream. The ancestors know. But I also wonder, like, what, and I guess we don't know just yet, but like, what is this whole bit about them catching on fire? Is it their
it's the magic.
It's their like Braithwaite blood. It's their magic that they have inside of them. But they, like, Tick and both Letty seem really, I guess if it's the magic, like, they both seem understandably alarmed that they're on fire. And neither, I mean, both of them are like, oh, I think Letty brings it up, like, why are we having this dream? And they don't seem to investigate it further, because Letty is not related to Hannah. I mean, they talk about it and they kind of get to like, oh, they have the book, but it's not like Tick is like, why are you having this dream when you are not related to Hannah? Like, they don't get to the whole pregnancy portion, which is made apparent to the viewer, because it's like, oh, well, she would have this dream because she's carrying your child, which is now linked to these people over here.
Right.
But like, neither one of them are like, wait a minute, why are you having this dream? How do you know about this dream? Like, I know why I'm linked. If I'm Tick, I know why I'm linked. Like, I have this slave raper blood in my bloodline. Like, I get that, but like, why do you have this dream? And they don't seem to go further with that conversation in a way that I would want them to talk about. And maybe that's because I'm a person, watching a show, asking these questions, but I'm like, yo, if me and my boyfriend are having the same dream that's linked to my particular bloodline, he should ask me, like, why am I having this dream? You know what I mean? Like, it's weird.
I think they could probably assume that they have, he told her what happened, when he tore the house down. It could be, they've been talking about it so much, and, it's... But, for it to be that similar, I guess, they definitely should have been asking more questions. But I also think it's an issue of time, like the same issue that we're running up against right now. But I think because this is an episode that's about Hippolyta. It's not about, these other things. But it's like they have to, get the rest of these things off the list, before they can get to the meat of the episode, which is about Hippolyta.
I do think it's indicative of the show. Like, so many things that we're kind of like, oh, they probably had this conversation off camera. Like, I would like them to have some of these conversations on camera. I mean, I don't think they did, because she had the opportunity to tell him that she was pregnant in the dream.
Well, no, I think that she is not in a space where she wants to admit to being pregnant, which, like, I don't know how they had birth control, like, back at that time period, like, rhythm method or something, girl. Like, how are you getting that? Like, I thought you were smarter than this.
Virgin,
but
and then they, maybe she never thought about it. Maybe she never thought about it because she hasn't been sexually active, so it wasn't like she ain't got no women log app like we have, or fertility apps where you can track your periods or whatever. It's 1955. I'm gonna give her a pass.
I think it's 56 now.
I mean, whatever it is, I'm gonna give her a pass on the pregnancy portion of the show.
But I'm just saying, like, I feel like she very clearly made a choice not to tell Tick about being pregnant in the dream. And she also does not tell Ruby, like, yes, maybe that's the case. This is not something that she wants to deal with. So I don't think that they would go on and have this conversation off camera, because she's not ready to deal with that. And then she goes into the room she goes into Hippolyta's bedroom to the window to get some air. She's still feeling nauseous, and that's when the wind blows. She sees the orrery, and then she knows there's some trouble happening. Like, Hippolyta knows what's going on. She took Hiram's orrery from my house, and she calls Tick, who's in St. Louis. And let's talk about how Tick got to St. Louis.
And I know you hate when I go back, but I'm not talking about the conversation about her being pregnant. I'm talking about, like, I would like him on camera to have mentioned this bit about his dream, and we just kind of wave away, like, them having, it's entirely plausible that they had conversations about what happened in Artem and, his dreams and their visions and whatever, but, like, we don't see that, so it leaves this door open where we're kind of like, oh, this is a plot hole. But yes, let's go to Tick in St. Louis.
Before we get to Tick in St. Louis, how he got to St. Louis is because he finally has to go and have a conversation with his father. The last time he saw his father, he nearly beat him to death in episode 5 because Montrose had murdered Yahima, the indigenous two-spirit person that they found in episode 4. So he goes to Montrose's house, or to his apartment, to have a conversation about this book that both Tick and Letty have now seen in dreams from Hannah, and to see what Montrose knows about Tick's mother, Montrose's former wife, Dora, and where that book could possibly be now. And before they get a chance to talk to Montrose, we have Montrose inside the house with Sammy. Montrose has had his, coming out party. So now he and Sammy are starting to get more comfortable being in like an official relationship. Sammy has stayed the night for the first time and has gotten up in the morning and cooked them breakfast. And Montrose has come out to see Sammy cooking the breakfast. And then Sammy makes a remark about a conversation that he had with one of Montrose's neighbors. So then Montrose starts to get all freaked out, like, oh my gosh, are other people outside of the queer community gonna know that I'm gay and that we're in a relationship and all? So Sammy tries to reassure him that the neighbor didn't see him go into Montrose's house or anything like that. But Montrose is still stuck in this really, toxic pattern. He starts being really mean to Sammy. Sammy storms out. Montrose runs out after him. And that's when he meets Tick and Letty in the hallway. And they see Montrose half-dressed coming after Sammy. Apologizing. Holding on to Sammy's arm. And so Sammy goes ahead and leaves. And then we have... I don't know. I think... when it comes to the queer characters' storylines, it's just, it's really frustrating. It's really frustrating. So we've already seen Montrose kind of in this kind of stereotypical, like, angry, closeted gay man situation, which I am sure that actually happened. I'm, that there are people who have, Black men who had those experiences and had their anger and reacted violently. I'm just saying, do we need to see it another time on screen? Like, I don't think that we need that. Like, I do think that there were different ways of possibly being, and we're just not going to get that from this show. unfortunately.
When I was watching this, I would say I think they did a very good job with Montrose being very again passive aggressive with Sammy. Like when he first comes out and he sees Sammy, he's like happy that Sammy is still there. But then, you know, when Sammy's making him breakfast and he hears how Sammy talked about this woman's scarf who got it from, again, Marshall Fields. And Montrose is like, oh, they don't let colored people work there. I missed the woman's name, but I'm like, was that Tamara? But probably not.
No, it wasn't. He was saying the person that had the scarf that went to Marshall Fields was a woman named Bernice, who is Montrose's neighbor. So that's how Montrose knew that Sammy had been talking to one of his neighbors. And that's why he started getting all agitated and being passive aggressive and complaining about everything and trying to pick fights with Sammy because he was afraid that Sammy had outed him basically to his neighbor.
And Sammy is aware because Sammy is also a queer person in this time.
But Sammy's openly queer.
Is he? Because
everybody knows that he's getting head in the back of his bar. Everybody knows that he's gay. It's
still like in the back. I mean, I don't think Sammy is like walking around the streets of the South Side with the rainbow flag. So I think he's still navigating these politics, but I don't know if it's like people in his everyday life know that he's doing these drag shows and, you know, he's performing. So I think Sammy is still very careful because he tells Montrose like, oh, I talked to her at the bus stop. I didn't talk to her in your building. So Sammy still knows like the temperature of 1955, 56 and how, you know, dangerous it is for a queer person to be alive at that time period. And so he knows the rules. Even if he's out to his community, he still knows not to out Montrose to his neighbors, right? And so he tells Montrose like, yo, I talked to her at the bus stop. I didn't talk to her in the hallway of your building. But like Montrose straight away he's criticizing the bacon, like, oh, I don't eat no pork, right? Like, of course he doesn't, because Montrose is very, by any means necessary, militant black man, so he don't eat pork. And Sammy's like, well, they don't got no beef sausage or whatever, so you will deal. And then Montrose is criticizing the grits, and I was just like, how are you gonna criticize anybody who makes you grits? Like, grits is a commitment, right? Like, let's be real. It's not quick grits. It's not those microwavable 5-minute grits. These are grits. And Sammy made grits. And a little smooth grits action, shout out to New Orleans, is really great. And so Montrose already is like, sure, in the previous episode he had his sort of freedom moment in this safe space, but now back in the real world he's feeling very out of sorts. And so we get everything that happens after that. And as soon as Tick deployed the F word, I was just like, damn it. Like, I was kind of thinking in my mind, like, okay, was there something else he could say? Was there something else he could do?
Yes,
like,
there was. We've already seen what he did. He said it.
Storm out. And,
he said it in episode 4. In episode 4, when they were in the museum with a Tree, and Tree was like, oh, Sammy is gay. And he's like, what does that have to do with me? I'm not a sissy. He could have used a different word. Even sissy is not that great of a word, but he could have used a different word. He was meaning to be hateful and hurtful. That was why he said it. And so it's just like, what do you want me to feel about Tick? Like, I don't like him. Like, I don't like him.
I mean, we particularly don't like him. But let's be real. In a world that people are still streaming Tory Lanez's album, in a world where people are still kind of be like, well, Breonna Taylor's boyfriend was a drug dealer and she shouldn't have been like that. Those are literally the tweets and emails I've been getting this week talking about Breonna Taylor's death and how I'm just hurt and angered and incensed by it. Like, I've been getting emails from people who are like, well, what did you expect? She did, whatever. And so in this world, unfortunately, Tick's words feel very accurate to this world. But in the world that we would like to be building, in the world that we would like to have, in a world where Black writers and Black showrunners and Black producers or whatever are more careful about how we deal with this. That's not what we want. So it's like, am I bringing to this show what I would personally like to be, right? Or are they bringing to me what the world actually is? And I know that people can, because they are writing it, they can make it whatever. Like, he didn't have to use the F word. Like, he didn't have to use it. Right.
He didn't have to use the word. And the thing, it's not so much about what we're bringing to the show, because yes, everybody brings their own personal perspective while they're watching any kind of television show. That's just what naturally happens. And you connect with it or don't connect with it based on your own personal experiences or your own personal desires. That's kind of a given. But I think what the show has set up here, having Black women writers and showrunners and, Black producers and all Black everything, and taking a racist man's works and in H.P. Lovecraft, and also taking another white man's work in Matt Ruff, who wrote the book Lovecraft Country, and taking that and essentially renaming it with all of these Black things. I mean, it's like we've been saying, this show is so different from the book Lovecraft Country. It's very different. It centers Black women. It empowers Black women. And I think when they're talking about Black women, and even, I'm not going to say Black queer women, because we don't have a Black queer woman character that we know of, unless we're going to count Ruby, who may be, down with the situation of William and Christina. No. We don't know yet, but as of now, there are no Black queer women characters. But I think when it comes to Black straight women, they're very, very great at providing empowerment for that demographic. And I think, and reimagining us in spaces. And we can see that in this episode. This is a reimagining of us, a reclaiming of us in all these spaces where we've been intentionally kept out of, intentionally told that we are not able, worthy enough to access these spaces. It's the invisible noose that Hippolyta talks about later on in the episode that keeps us in place. And so this show is about redefining all those things and blowing all of that white supremacist trash out of the way and building our own paths. And this very episode is about naming yourself. So I do think this is just a big misstep. I do. I think that this is an unfortunate misstep. And I think that there's been several when it comes to the queer characters on the show, when it comes to Tick as well. I mean, he's just beyond irredeemable for me at this point. Like everything, even at the moment where he comes in and saves Hippolyta is annoying to me. I'm just like, why are you here?
Yeah, you're pretty down on Tick.
I'm over it. And then to have him go out there and kind of explain why he's so angry, I do think that he has a right to be upset with his father for beating him, for telling him not to be soft, and, thinking that, oh, he was doing it for my protection. But when in reality, he was just, basically trying to beat Tick instead of beating himself, and to protect himself from actually accepting the fact that he was a queer man. So I can understand all that anger and frustration and all that. But at this point, I don't have any empathy for Tick as a character. I just really don't. I think that it's just too much stuff. Murdered women, you're mean to Letty, and, now you're being homophobic to your dad. I can't.
Yeah. I don't think I'm at that point. I have a sliver of empathy for Tick. We'll see how this season plays out. I don't know. And maybe it's, like they say at the beginning of the Black Star song, even my conditioning has been conditioned. I still have hope that particularly him and Montrose can patch it up, and that this whole, he dropped the F word on his daddy, and his daddy was like, I'm still your daddy. Montrose, to his credit, summoned his righteous parental rage. I don't know. I don't think I'm completely out on Tick, but I'm not a fan at this moment. And so I think we should move on to what this episode is really about, and that's Hippolyta.
We can't get to Hippolyta until we find out why Tick is in St. Louis. So when he storms out, Letty
again with the tick again.
Yes,
with
so
Atticus.
Letty finds out from Montrose where I guess a living family member of Dora's is.
cousin.
So it's a cousin who's in St. Louis. So they go. Tick and Letty go to Hippolyta's to try to borrow her car so that they can go to St. Louis and find out what this cousin of his mother's knows about Dora and this family book that Hannah must have been keeping around. But Hippolyta lies to them, tells them that she's going on a guide trip when really she is going to the location, the coordinates that were on the orrery that she unlocked. She got a key and she got coordinates. So she took the key and she's going to these coordinates, and these coordinates are leading her to Mansfield, Kansas. She doesn't tell Tick or anybody where she's going. Ruby's there, to babysit Diana, which is how Letty and Ruby get hooked up. Letty decides to stay with Ruby, and Tick decides to get on the bus, go to St. Louis, and that's where he learns about the book is probably burned up because the family went to Tulsa. And so they were in Tulsa in 1921. During the Tulsa massacre, Dora was the only supposed survivor from Tulsa in their family. And so the cousin is basically saying that's probably gone, but here's a family album that you can look at so you can see other people in your family that you may not have met before. He sees the cousin, and the cousin has a mark, or I don't know if it's the cousin or if it's his mother. Somebody is a black woman in the photo album who has a birthmark on her arm, and he freaks out because it's the exact same birthmark that he has on his back. We've never seen this birthmark before, and we've seen quite a bit of Atticus's back, but whatever. So anyway, he's like, oh, there's a connection here, which makes me think that perhaps Hannah cast a spell and it's a mark of protection. So maybe that's why Dora was able to escape from Tulsa in 1921. We don't know. There is an episode, I think the finale is called Tulsa. So we will, I think, go to Tulsa at some point during the show and find out what exactly happened back then, where the book is. We'll find out more of that probably later on. But yes, so that's when he gets a call from Letty, who also knows the number of where he's staying in St. Louis at this cousin's house. And so she calls him, tells him that she found the orrery and that Hippolyta knows that they're lying to her. And Letty gives Tick the coordinates to where Hippolyta is probably going. Tick, shows up there, but we'll get to Hippolyta now. Now we'll get to Hippolyta.
Can we pause in this whole tick situation? Because that was a lot, right? That was a lot. It's so funny because when Tick is looking at this birthmark, you are totally right that we have not seen it before. And I mean, just to make sure, I'll go back and look at all the times Tick has been naked, but I'm pretty sure we ain't seen it before.
In episode 1, Letty was taking a picture of his daggone back, and we was all into it.
It is a thing, right? Me and my grandfather have similar birthmarks on our arms. So even though it's not something that we've seen before, it's something that I appreciated because it's something that is totally possible. Because my maternal grandfather and I have, these birthmarks on our arms that weren't always there. So sometimes birthmarks develop, later in life or whatever. Point number 2, there's no, according to IMDb and Wikipedia, there's no episode called Tulsa. There is something, the last episode's called Full Circle. So I'm sure they're going to try to
Ooh, they changed it.
Yeah, they're going to try to tie up.
Because I remember...
No, so
they changed that.
This one is called I Am. 8 is allegedly called...
Oh, no, it's number 9. It's episode 9, Rewind 1921.
Rewind 1921.
That's what I'm thinking
is about
of.
Tulsa, exactly. So I think we're going to be going there. Not to bring it up again, but similar to Watchmen, we're going to be going there to see more about Tick's family, perhaps in this Tulsa race massacre. But it's this whole story about family Bibles and the things being burned up. It's just kind of all of the things that America has stolen from Black people, right? And you mentioned it earlier, like, we're in a heavy week. America has stolen our lives. America has stolen our land. America has stolen our livelihood. And America has stolen our history. Like, we've been able to make culture, jazz and the blues and hip hop and films and writings and all this stuff because America took all of our history from us, and we had to reimagine our history in this very strange land. And so it makes perfect sense to me that Tick is not able to find this book. Like, in the previous scene, like before, when him and Letty are talking about this dream or whatever, and they realize that Letty sees this book, and Tick is like, what book? And then they're like, the book of names, you know what I mean? And he's like, we're going to go after the book of names when Christina's looking for a bunch of pages. And so, we going to get the whole damn thing. And then to get to his relative's house in St. Louis, or his family friend's house in St. Louis, and to hear that this thing was burned up by white people, like, it's just another thing that has been taken from Black people that I hope is not actually true. So this little image, I feel like, is a clue to where, I don't know, maybe he'll find the book, maybe he won't, but I hope that he will, because I'm tired of Black people losing things to this punk ass country, to be quite clear.
And so I think one of the things that you mentioned about the birthmarks and genetically passing those things down, and as you're talking about like jazz and all these things that we've been able to create despite not knowing our history, but still finding out, oh, your recipe, that is just like recipes that we use in Ghana. Oh, like your style of praise and worship, that's exactly like how we do in Benin. And like, there's just like, it's genetic. Like, it's still, as much as they steal from us, it's in our genes. Like, it has been passed down. Yeah,
it's in our bones.
It's not just trauma. And that's what that is such a beautiful and powerful message and story. Like, yes, there is magic that is being passed along too. Like, yes, we are getting the trauma through the cells that we're passing down. But we're also, and we can see that now with Letty having this dream as she's pregnant with this baby and they're on fire. Like, the trauma is coming, but the magic is there too. And I just think that is so powerful. Ooh, I just got chills. I think that is so powerful and, exciting to think about. Like, it's not just trauma. Our ancestors are with us. They continue to be with us, and there is stuff to learn. So I'm really excited about this journey that they are going on to figure out more. And I think it's not going to be about necessarily whether they can find the book in the present day. What we've learned from this episode and from Hippolyta specifically is that the orrery, it's not a time machine. It is something, it's a portal to many worlds, and that there is math equations that you can use to get you to these different coordinates in time and in space. And so I do think they're going to be able to use this, hopefully, to recover a lot of that and interact even with people and versions of, their ancestors at different points in their lives. And that is exactly what Hippolyta is able to do in this episode.
Let's get to that. So Hippolyta ends up at this. She makes it to this observatory. She sees this machine that, looks curious. She starts pushing buttons. The machine turns on, and she starts going into like mental math in a way that I don't have the range. So she starts going to mental math equations, fiddling with things on the machine. She hears these two white cops come up who are talking about Lancaster, which isn't Lancaster the captain from Chicago?
Yes.
So they're talking about Lancaster. So I'm not sure why they are there at the same time that she happens to be there.
One of them, I think, is from the Order of the Ancient Dawn Chicago chapter, because he's talking to the other officer and says, Captain Lannister, I'm messing up my sci-fi worlds. Captain Lancaster is very grateful to you for looking after this place for him. That's what he says when they're coming down the stairs. And the other guy's like, well, what is this machine? What's so special about it anyway? And that's when they discover that it's been turned on, that Hippolyta has turned it on, and they kind of like hold her at gunpoint. But one of the cops there is two cops. So I think that's the other thing too, that they are trying to let you know, and that Watchmen also let you know that these cops are gangs. That they have many uniforms, and they have many, they have at the core, their allegiance is to white supremacy, and that they can be in Chicago and still be in cahoots with the cops in Kansas. I mean, I think that's what these unions, police unions that we have now, are showing us as well. These people are unified. It's not about the police just in your city that you have to worry about, or just in your county, or just in your state. This is a united effort. There is this gang of blue people. That's the blue lives. That's what they like to call themselves. And they have a similar mission. So it seems as if Lancaster has asked the cops in Kansas to look after this abandoned warehouse in Mansfield, Kansas, and has sent this other lodge member down to Kansas to go, check out the machine and make sure, I guess because they know that Christina is also looking for the orrery and looking for all that kind of stuff. So that's probably why they're there at that time. So that's when they confront Hippolyta and hold her at gunpoint. And then, of course, our hero of the day, Tick, shows up, which I did the math on this. St. Louis is 7.5 hours away from Mansfield, Kansas. And so I'm really hoping, for the sake of, because it seems like Letty calls Tick. Tick leaves right away. I mean, we don't really know. We just know that he shows up right when Hippolyta is being held at gunpoint by these police officers. But I'm hoping that what actually happened was Hippolyta was trying to figure out all these equations to get the machine working. And she was there for at least 24 hours, because it's dark when she gets there and it's dark when Tick gets there. So hopefully this is the next day where Tick shows up 7.5 hours later. Because
it seemed really sudden, and I was side-eyeing it, but
and I think too, because they already know what happens when you travel at nighttime. So I'm hoping that they were traveling, that he got there the next day, and that's how they were able to time it up.
I guess because he doesn't have a car, he's on the bus.
I think that he probably, he may have, hopefully his cousin, this is the thing, I don't want to ask these questions. Put it in the show. I don't want to ask how Tick showed up here.
Exactly.
But I do think maybe next week, based on the way that this episode ends, I do think next week we will find out what Tick was up to and Tick's side of this story. Because Tick also goes on an adventure, but it is less important than the amazing Hippolyta's adventure that she goes on to. So Tick is fighting with the police, and the police are fighting with Hippolyta. They knock her out, and it starts the machine to go into overdrive. A portal opens. Tick throws one of the cops into the portal, and Hippolyta ends up with one of the cops' guns. The cop is coming after Tick, and she shoots the cop and kills him. And then she gives the gun to Tick. So hopefully he will take the rap for this, and then maybe he'll be redeemed, because, he's got to do something to stop getting on my nerves. But anyway, Hippolyta is sucked into the portal, and Tick jumps in after her. And at the end of the episode, he comes out of the portal. When you think it's going to be Hippolyta coming out, it's actually him. He's come out of the portal. He's got a book. It says Lovecraft Country on it by George Freeman. So he's obviously had an interaction with George inside wherever he went in the portal, and we'll probably see more of it next week. But anyway, back to Hippolyta getting sucked back into the portal. She finds herself, this is back to the more of the biblical energy that's been happening all season. She sees this black woman in a RoboCop outfit and a huge afro, just a beautiful, stunning black woman. And Hippolyta asks her who she is. And the woman says, I am. That's just like when Moses asked the burning bush in the Old Testament, in the Torah, who are you? And God replies, I am that I am. And that's the title of the episode as well. It's about naming yourself. It's about understanding your limitlessness. It's about showing how your words have power, and what you speak transports you to the places where you want to be or where you actually end up. And so I think that was also a really powerful message as well. And so as she starts to figure out what is going on with her and who she is and why she's in this place, she goes through all these different stages. She goes through the stage of joy, she goes through rage, she goes through love, she goes through freedom. And I think it's really, really powerful to allow Hippolyta to express all these emotions that Black women feel on a regular basis. I think this is a really great time for us to bring in Aunjanue Ellis and talk through Hippolyta's journey and how this impacts her as a character and how this impacts Black women in the audience. We have a very special guest today, masterful actress of stage and screen, the star of Lovecraft Country, Episode 7. She is Hippolyta. It's Aunjanue Ellis. Welcome to Black Girl Watching, Aunjanue.
Hello, how y'all doing?
We are great. So happy to have you. One of the really, really interesting things about this show, Lovecraft Country, is that it's exploring Black women's rage in some really like unseen before ways. I mean, it's kind of revolutionary the way that this has been addressed throughout this show. But Hippolyta's episode, I Am, takes it to the next level, allowing her to explore all that she could be in the universe uninterrupted. So what was the pitch to get you involved in this project? How did you react when you first read the script?
Well, I read the first episode, I guess, in maybe early 2018. And I read it and I just was stunned by it. And I got another job, and then the show actually, the part was going to go to somebody else. So I, was disappointed, but, it was one of those weird kind of moments where I really wasn't worried about it. I knew that they had offered it to someone else and that I understood that they were going to do it. But I somehow, in the deep recesses of my, quixotic mind, I was just like, I don't believe it's over, And so this other job that I had it was a pilot, and the pilot didn't get picked up. And I think maybe a couple of days later, they said that the role was still open, and the woman that they had offered it to, it didn't work out, or she wanted to do something else. And so I went to meet Misha and Jan, who directed the episode, that directed the pilot series originally, and ultimately, I got the role. But I knew early on that this was something that I knew would be. I like that you use the word revolutionary. And I love strange. I love black strange. Because I grew up with black strange, because I grew up in Mississippi, and we just live with, we live with our ghosts, we live with our stories, and nothing ever dies. And so it just spoke to me in all those ways that I want to be spoken to as an actor when I want to, take a job.
Indeed. Hi, Aunjanue. This is Britni. We interviewed Courtney B. Vance about episode 2, and one of the things that he really kind of spoke highly of was you. He said he loved working with you and that you're a phenomenal actress, which we already knew just kind of by watching you over the years in several different parts. But one of the things he said was that he really hoped that Lovecraft would not only introduce you to more people, but also hopefully garner you the, awards and nominations and stuff like that that you so rightly have deserved throughout the course of your career. He was highly upset that you didn't get a nomination for the Clark Sisters, which, oh my God, so amazing. But how does that feel? Like, you've been in the business for so long, and I know everyone always says they're not in it for awards, but it is sort of a recognition, right? So how does that feel to sometimes be nominated and not be nominated for things that you were, and that everyone agrees that you were just amazing in?
Yeah, well, I want to preface this by saying that everyone that was nominated in that category that I was in, I don't want to take anything away from their work. Yeah, all of them, and I'm talking about the Black women in it, in the category who were nominated. They're all, there's women I have utter respect for. Some I've worked with them, and I just think all of them are have set templates for how it should be done. So I want to preface that before I say anything, because I don't want anyone to take this as me being ungracious. But I think though it's for the part that I played in the Clark Sisters, it was so important to me. And the reason why it was so important to me is because I knew it would be important to Black women. And these particular Black women represent a culture, represent a community that is so often erased and sidelined and marginalized. And the reality is, we stand on the shoulders of these women. We stand on the shoulders, whether we want to acknowledge it or not. We stand on the shoulders of Black women who go to church, period. We just do. And the reason why we do is because these were the women who were doing the hard work during the civil rights movement, who were doing the hard work in the freedom rights movement. They were doing that work. You had the men out up front, right? They were, getting all the glamour and the glory, but it was the women in the kitchen and in the pews doing the work. And that is who the Clark Sisters. They are a part of that. They are a part of that tradition, and a lot of that tradition is song, and they are a part of that tradition. What is unfortunate and why it was hurtful. I've been transparent about that. It was hurtful that that not just that I didn't get nominated, but that the movie didn't get nominated for anything. What was hurtful about that is that these women deserve their flowers, and so my getting a nomination would have been my being able to give something back to these women who have given so much to me and given so much to the world. And I think, speaking about, you talked about Black women rage, and I think that, the places that we have to go to as Black women to survive this world that we are in, the places that we have to go to. The Clark Sisters, and particularly Twinkie Clark, speak to that in a way that no other artist has done, especially in gospel music. So when you are a woman and you are in a culture that is repressive, how do you handle that pain? And so Twinkie Clark took that pain and put it on an organ. And what is also unfortunate is that the work and the genius of Black women gets erased. It gets ignored. It's vanished. It's like it doesn't count. It doesn't matter. And I want to use that word matter. Like, it does not matter. It does not matter. And we know that that's not true. We know that that's not true. And so the pain for me is that not me, but these women in the Clark sisters, the black woman in the church embodied by the Clark sisters, that was ignored. And, I don't know about y'all, but I feel like it is my job to undo that disappearing. And that's done intentionally. It is done. It is done intentionally. I mean, we see it all the time. It's hurtful to me I read a newspaper like the New York Times, right? I'm talking about it very specifically. Someone sends me an article. It's about Fiona Apple, and so you have the music editors singing Fiona Apple's praises, and it's assumed of me as a consumer of American culture that I'm supposed to know who Fiona Apple is, right? I'm supposed to know who Fiona Apple is. But if you are not black and not from the church, you're not expected to know who the Clark sisters are. You understand what I'm saying?
Right.
And so that there's a presumption of excellence, a presumption of genius. And this is not a blanket comment on white culture, but there is sort of a presumption of genius when it comes to white culture, parts of white culture. But that presumption is not there for black culture because we take it for granted. We just think that, I said this in another interview, we think that we just woke up like this. And I appreciate Beyonce for saying them words. You know what I mean? That was everybody, that was everybody's anthem for a minute. I woke up like this. But the fact of the matter is Beyonce didn't just wake up like that. Beyonce worked her tail off. Beyonce is in somebody's studio so she can shock us with the next video she got gonna put out that nobody's expecting her to do.
Right.
With the next song, all of that stuff. That's work. That's work. It is genius. It is black woman genius that is ignored. It is ignored. And what I want to say, what I think is also important here, that unfortunately, it's hard for us to break through anyway. But unless that black woman genius is not framed in a sort of a white sanctioned context, then it's like it doesn't exist.
Right.
So you can have something as beautiful as the music of the Clark sisters that can be ignored because it's not contextualized, it's not framed in white sanctioned, I don't know what is the word, context. But I talked a lot, but
No, that was amazing. And it goes right back to the episode, honestly, because, there's this moment where, Hippolyta is looking over her life and the ways that she has been minimalized in a white supremacist context. And there's rage there. And then she gives this really powerful speech after she, she's riling up the black women warriors and they kill all the white colonizers that are attacking them. And then there is this really timely speech that Hippolyta gives. We are here because we did not believe them when they told us our rage wasn't ladylike. Our hatred for our enemies was not godlike. When we are free to hate when we must, we are free to kill when we must, we're free to bring destruction when we must. And so I'm looking at this time that we're in right now and, all the protests that have been happening all summer because of police killing black people and it just relentlessly killing black people. And then police not being indicted. And then a black man, Attorney General Danielle Cameron, chooses not to bring charges against the killers of Breonna Taylor. There is a lot of black women rage that's happening right now, and limitations on our lives, that's happening and that's been happening throughout history in this country. So I was just really interested to know, what were you taught about rage and how you should handle rage, and how do you choose to handle rage in your own life today?
Well, first of all, you have to be honest about having rage. I mean, for a long time, we were told that we shouldn't be angry. When I was at Brown in school, sat around with some other folks who were doing some organizing, and somebody said had the audacity to say that they were angry about something, and the shame that was brought upon that person was they were silent. Forget rage. You can't be angry about something. I don't know how you can live in this world go through the day and not be angry. You got to be dead to not be angry. You have to be cold and closed off from reality to not be angry. In terms of my arriving at the space of accepting this rage. I had a mama who was kicked out of school from Alcorn University because she was leading protests. And this was something that I didn't know about until a few years ago. And I met other people in some other town way away from here, because I'm in Mississippi right now and I was somewhere else. And somebody else was telling me about my own mama. And they were like, yeah, your mama, she was something else. They kicked her out of school for, and I'm like, what? I didn't know that. And I came to my mom and I was like, Mommy, you didn't tell me that you got kicked out of school for protesting. And she just, in the most it was just like so matter of fact about it. She's like, yeah, I did. And that's all I kept trying to pull from her, like, tell me more. And she there was nothing really that she could say. She was like, yeah, I did that. That's what happened. I did that. And what was happening was she was at Alcorn as a black school, and they were, but it's also state funded. So that's why they were trying to repress these protests. And my mother wouldn't stand for it. And she got kicked out of school, and she went to Georgia, and she worked for the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. So I grew up with that. My grandfather was a pastor of a church. He allowed freedom riders to come and have meetings at his church. They bombed his church. He was arrested for it. I've told the story a few times. But I thought that was my link, But meanwhile, my mama was my real link, because she was sacrificing her education, sacrificing her body in service of justice. So I came at it honest, and I'm glad that we are at this moment. I'm glad that we are seeing a Hippolyta Freeman and a Letty on television right now, because we have a lot to be mad about. We have a lot to be enraged about, and I think that Black women particularly, I'm not ashamed of this. We are trying to save this planet. We are trying to do that. And we do that naturally. Don't nobody have to tell us how to vote. You understand what I'm saying? Nobody has to tell us that. We know innately how to do those things, because that's what we do. That's what we have always done. So I am excited that folks get to see somebody embody that shamelessly on television. And I'm so glad you remember the words to that speech, because I had actually forgotten some of those words that she said. But yeah, yes, ma'am. I welcome that rage, and I welcome portraying that rage.
Speaking of, you come from a long line, as you just mentioned, of activists, from your grandfather to your mom. You've been advocating for years to get the Mississippi flag changed, to take off the Confederate symbol on the flag, and it finally happened. They finally voted to remove the Confederate portion of the Mississippi flag. I guess, how does it feel to know that in the midst of all of this, these protests, this righteous rage, sort of as you just mentioned, like this thing that you have been advocating for is finally happening?
I say a couple things. About that. Well, three things. I think it's really important for Black folks to know that one of the major reasons why the flag came down is because the Black football players in these colleges down here in Ole Miss and Mississippi State said that they wouldn't play anymore if the flag remained. So the SEC, the Southeastern Conference, and the NCAA, they had to respond to that, because they wouldn't have nobody to play. If the Black boys, young Black men stopped playing, they wouldn't have no teams, right? So that was going to be untenable. The biggest industries for the state of Mississippi are the church and football. So what happened, coincidentally, was that those conferences were saying, look, you got to do something different, because we're not going to do blah, blah, blah here. They were empty threats, but they were substantial enough. for them to be scared by that. And also the church organization, Southern Baptist Convention, they said that the flag had to come down, had to come down. And then I did this video. Where I addressed the governor's wife. It was a lot. It was a lot happening, and not just with me, but I think one of the things that's really, really important is to know is that these young Black men recognize their own power. So that's incredibly significant. That when we know our power, and we know that when we take our presence away from these industries that thrive because of us, it's consequential. The other thing is that what people have said to me on the journey of my fighting for this, well, it's just a flag. Why do you care so much? And here's what people miss about that flag is that the flag acts as a proxy for legalized segregation. So if you see that as a Black person or a gay person or a Black gay person or anybody with any sort of conscience, if you see that flag at a business, at a restaurant, you're not gonna go there. And white supremacists here, they know the power of that. So that's why they hang that flag. That's why they hang the flag. So my position is if we have made segregation illegal in this country, then why do we have physical proxies for segregation? And folks don't realize that is a physical manifestation of segregation. It's how you keep Black people out. The other thing about it is, it even though that is very real, the fact of the matter is Mississippi was one way before the flag was up, and it's the same way it was when the flag came down. This is centuries of work that is not going to be dismantled because the flag came down. I, myself, and everybody else who care about, Black life, we have to remain vigilant here with that.
Absolutely. So you were talking earlier about Black woman genius, which I just loved because we see that's who Hippolyta is. She is a mathematician, she's a scientist, she's an explorer, she's all of these amazing things, and she's passing this on to her daughter to also become, a Black woman genius when she grows up. Also, when she opens the orrery and she goes into this, otherworldly place, this unknown universe, it's her guide there is a Black woman genius, and she's got an afro and she's powerful, and it's really beautiful.
Yes.
Well, yeah, so she goes to Paris. She's surrounded by other Black women who help her loosen up and find joy and find that freedom that she couldn't find in America. And then she's taught by Black women warriors how to fight and how to stand up for herself. And there are like hardly any men around. Like she needs all of this Black women genius energy around her to keep her on her journey, to keep her strong. And I'm just wondering if there are any experiences. I know you've talked so much about your mom and, the ways that Black women have built basically the foundation upon which we all stand in 2020. So I was just wondering if there's something that you would like to share about the ways that, Black women have impacted your life or your career, any moments that you would like to share.
Well, I think, I'm glad I'm learning so much listening to you. It's hard sometimes when you're in something that you lose perspective on it, So I'm so happy to hear that you saw what they were trying to accomplish when they wrote the episode. So that really is affirming. So thank you for sharing that with me. It drives me up the walls when I watch movies and television, and it seems that the standard storyline is that a woman is sort of lost and she's ambitious, and then she has to. This is a standard storyline for so many of these movies, especially like these Christmas Lifetime movies. You know what I'm saying? So you have like this woman, and she's successful and she's ambitious, and then so something happens and she has to go back to her hometown, and then she meets a man who's from her hometown, and she finds out that she's gonna, at the end of the episode, she finds out that she's gonna get this great promotion. So she has to choose between the man and the job. So in every one of these movies, every one of them, and it is not just on Lifetime, it's on not just on Hallmark. It's that is like the template for almost every story about women who have to discover themselves in some sort of way. Every time, it's a man that says to her, "You're not who you used to be. You used to be blah 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 blah." And I miss that version of you. So this is what you used to be. You have lost yourself. You need to go back to who you were, because that's what we need you to be. That's what we need you to be, right? And for some reason, it is always a man who is a woman's the person who tells the woman or reminds the woman of who her true self is. And what makes this episode so fantastic to me is that it ain't nothing but Black women's voices in this woman's head. These are Black women who are her portal to herself. The Black women telling her, a Black woman saying to her, "You can name yourself. You can." Everybody else has tried to name you, or have tried to name you. Are carrying the weight, the stain of everyone else's, and the burden of everyone else needs you to be, or requires you to be, or demands that you be. Now is your moment to name yourself. I was talking to somebody the other day, and I was telling them that it reminds me of this essay that Hortense Spillers has about called "Mama's Baby, Papa's Maybe," and the idea behind it is that what she says is, if America didn't have the Black woman, they would have to invent her.
Mm.
So the idea behind that, for me, in terms of Black womanhood, is that we are the receptacle of so much trash, right? Like literal trash, right? Literal trash. And then also the trash of how people see us when they choose to see us, right? When they do choose to see us or ignore us in the case of the Clark sisters, but when they do choose to see us, we carry all of that. So this country needs that, right? This culture needs that. So it's in order for it to flourish. And that's what Black women, that's what Black women carry with them. And it's not just, it doesn't just come from white American culture. It comes from within our own culture as well. You know what I'm saying? So
Right.
this is what Hippolyta brings to this moment of reclaiming and reclaiming the significance of her own life, the value of her own body, the value of her own sexuality. You know, I love that Megan Thee Stallion said she was shot in over the summer, and the way people thought it was a joke, you know, and that made me so, it made me so angry. Like, oh yeah, she got shot, and I'm like, wait a minute, this woman could have lost her life because a man shot her. He shot her. We would have a whole other conversation if he wasn't a better shot. We would be talking about Meg Thee Stallion in past tense right now. That should have been a tragedy. If this young woman, it wouldn't have been no WAP, because that girl would have been dead. And it's the idea that Black women are not protected, we are not protected, valued. We are not given significance in the way that white women are. In this moment of Hippolyta saying that I am choosing myself right now. You know, yes, I'm a mother. Yes, I have a great husband. Yes, I'm in a good marriage, but I'm diminishing myself.
Mm.
And you have these Black women in her life telling her, giving her permission and giving her support to reclaim herself, to reclaim her identity. You know, that is so powerful. I need that right now. I think that, you know, I have a wonderful, wonderful man in my life, but I know what that's like. You know, when we are constantly having to fight, you know, like I said, fight from disappearing. We have to fight that culturally. We have to fight that politically. We have to fight that sexually. We have to fight that in so many ways. And then when we are present, then we have to fight for our survival, because we could get shot, and it'll ultimately be a joke. So that's why, for me, I agree with you that this moment with this episode with Hippolyta, and women, Black women surrounding her and her are lifting her and helping her and guide her through this moment of self-liberation. I hope that it leads and that Black women will feel seen by it.
Mm. Well, I mean, absolutely. I think that was definitely achieved. That was so amazing about this episode. But one of the things that you touched on, and this episode definitely got into, was what you were talking about. This idea that a Black woman in what could be considered a good marriage, where she loves her husband and her husband loves her, she's still shrinking for him. He still doesn't allow her to be great. He lets her shrink for his own comfort. And that just happens so often. Like, we see that so many times. And so I'm wondering if there's anything that you hope that Black men who are watching this show might receive from that scene with George. And later when she takes him exploring with her, that this is something that they can do together, like that nobody has to shrink. I thought that was really beautiful.
Right. Yeah. Nobody has to shrink. It's about like how much space that we take and being comfortable with taking that space. And I think that sometimes men are uncomfortable with our taking that space that we naturally do, whether they want us to take it or not, that we naturally take. I think that there's a lot of word and there's a lot of air and words given to how wonderful and beautiful Black women are. The beautiful Black woman. Like, we hear that all the time. Black women are so beautiful. Black women. You know what I mean? But it's like a symbolic thing, as opposed to a physical blood, skin, bones thing. And that's why this whole thing about, I keep going back to Meg Thee Stallion, because that Black women are not protected. We are not protected. And I think that, Black men need to look at Black women less symbolically and more as like I said, blood, skin, and bone, and something that needs to be protected for the survival of the race. And I think that with George and Hippolyta, you can have a man with the best of intentions, and I think George has the best of intentions. I don't think George is, he seeks out to repress Hippolyta. I think he does want to protect her. That's why one of the reasons why he wants her to stay at home. But what she wants ain't even on the earth. You know what I mean? Like, it's nothing that even the earth can satisfy. So what does a partner look like in that scenario? When you are dealing with a woman who's not even earthbound, And I think I don't think I can overstate this. I don't think Black women are earthbound. I think we are just something else.
Well,
And you are such an amazing actress, and we really appreciate having you on our show to talk through all of these issues amongst ourselves, three non-earthbound Black women. Hopefully 3 Black women geniuses. Before we let you go, I know you have a bunch of stuff coming up in terms of King Richard. We wanted to get into like the fight scenes, the nude scenes, which just quick, like, have you been nude in a show or a film before, and how was that for you in this experience?
I ain't been all the way naked. I ain't never been all the way naked. I've had, my breasts out, but I haven't been, completely nude. Did they keep that in there?
they did.
God.
It was one of the most amazing scenes. It was beautiful.
Girl, let me tell you, some of my relatives were like, oh Lord, Dr. Maddie Moss Clark is naked on TV tonight.
I mean, I appreciate it because normally when we do see nudity on screen, it's always a certain type of body. And so I appreciated, the body diversity, that you look like a normal person. Like, I'm like, oh, body goals, because I need to get like Aunjanue, to be quite clear. I enjoyed it selfishly.
Thank you. Yeah, no, I have never, I've never been negative. I don't really trip about stuff like that. I really don't. I'm not ashamed. I wish, certainly I wish I was, and there are things that I'm not satisfied with my body or whatever, but I feel that in the project of trying to tell a story, that I want to be able to come with it as I am and who I am, and that means, if it means, me, it means showing my body, Black, we ain't got nothing to be scared of. We have anything to be ashamed of. It's the world that has the problems. They're the ones with the issues. You shouldn't have that. And I really, I don't care. I really don't care. I mean, folks can say what they want to say. It doesn't really matter to me at all. I'm trying to tell stories, and they wanted me to be naked in the telling of it, and I'm good with it.
Well, I mean, I think you should be so proud of this episode and the work that you've done in this episode. And we're just so thankful for you and the way that you continuously just pour yourself into these roles and give us an opportunity to see ourselves reflected back and see who we could be reflected back. I think that is just, it's so amazing. And we just appreciate you so much. We've kept you so long over our original time. So we thank you so much for talking to us. This was amazing.
I appreciate you wanting to talk to me. And, I've read your work with me, and I've read the article that you wrote recently about violence, pornography of violence against Black bodies in film and television. And I appreciate you both for, having these hard conversations. So thank you.
Thank you. All right. You have a great day.
Much.
Yes. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you again to Miss Aunjanue Ellis for stopping by Black Girl Watching to have such an amazing, important, and timely conversation. Before we wrap up this week's episode, I think we just had a few more key points to talk about, particularly around Hippolyta's journey through space.
Some of my favorite parts about the journey that Hippolyta takes into herself, going to see Josephine Baker and then actually be on stage and dance with her and have that joy that she talks about having. And then getting to sit back after a period of time, because you see the coordinates change. So the coordinates are telling you this is a different, that time is passing, or that she's in different spaces in each of these coordinates. So when she's having this conversation with Josephine Baker and she's talking about the rage that she feels about how white people made her feel small, and then the rage that she feels at herself for letting them make her feel like that. I just think that's something every Black woman in America can relate to. I've definitely had those experiences at work with white and Black people, with people in positions of power who make it their mission to undermine you and make you doubt yourself and make you question who you are and your worth. And the toll that it takes on you when you finally come to a space of empowerment, that was wrong. They shouldn't have been able to do that to me. And then this kind of feeling of why did you even let that happen? Like the victim blaming that happens. I'm really glad that she addressed that. And then Josephine Baker gives her this space to be like, what are you going to do with all this anger? And she goes and she slaughters all these white men after being trained by all these Black women warriors. And then she gives that powerful speech that we just talked about with Aunjanue, that I love so much. And I just think it's really important, because right at the end of that speech, she says, we are free to bring about destruction if that's what it requires. And after we grind these oppressive institutions that are holding us back into the dust, that we acknowledge that all the work that we did, all the rage, all the violence, all the retribution that we enacted, that is our love. And I didn't want to skip over that. I know that's how she gets to name herself Hippolyta, George's husband, and gets to, that's a different stage where she's getting into the love. But that the act of violence, the act of revolutionary retribution is an act of love too, is very, very important, because I feel like Black Lives Matter protesters, anybody who names anything, if you name colorism, if you name white supremacy, if you name racism, if you name any of these, if you name misogynoir, any of these institutions, whether you're talking to Black men who are practicing misogynoir, like Tory Lanez, or you're talking about, white people like Donald Trump and all of his supporters and what they're doing. If you are the person that's naming them racist, if you're naming the misogynoir, if you're naming the colorism that you see in Hollywood and calling out Black men who only seem to be partnered in their romantic movies with, Black women who are very, very fair skinned or half white, or if you're even calling out Lovecraft Country for having another pairing that we've seen over and over and over and over again in Hollywood, then you become a hater. It's like you're hateful. There's, you're the person with the problem. There's no problem with these institutions that are being oppressive. The problem is with you for being hateful. And so I think it's so important that Hippolyta gives this message. This is our love. I thought that was so important for them to name that and to name it love, because it's not even so much about hatred for white people, hatred for these oppressive institutions. This is about love of self. This is the things that they tried to take from us. Love of self, love of community. You can love Black people so much that you are willing to fight and destroy and create and do whatever it is that Hippolyta named in this speech as an act of love. So I definitely hope that people are empowered by that and take that message. They don't take it lightly, because I think that is important. And it's a way to shut down a lot of dissent by calling people hateful, so it's really, really important. I think it also hits on this Che Guevara quote. He says, "At the risk of seeming ridiculous, let me say that the true revolutionary is guided by great feelings of love. It is impossible to think of a genuine revolutionary lacking this quality." As we look at what love is, that standing up for Megan Thee Stallion, that, standing up against violence, that enacting violence, that setting these buildings on fire, the riots and everything else that's happening in the names of Breonna Taylor, in the name of George Floyd, in the name of all the people that have been killed by police brutality, that is an act of love of self and love for Black people, that our lives matter, that we matter, and that we have selves to defend.
And I think it's important that those people kind of shepherding this righteous anger and this righteous love into Hippolyta's consciousness, or helping her to figure this out, are all Black women. Like, she doesn't encounter a Black man who's kind of shaping, or a man in general who is shaping this idea for her. They're all women. I think, again, that's very prescient for these times that we're living in. Like, Black women lead these movements. We are the heartbeat and the backbone of these movements. And even though a lot of us count each other out, we're still, a lot of us are still looking for a man to sort of step up and be the MLK or the Malcolm X of these particular movements, when all of us are right here. And so I think it's really powerful that Hippolyta realizes that within herself, that she is the one, to paraphrase, that she is the one that she's waiting for. Like, she doesn't need anybody else's permission. And I hope that we get to see more of this Hippolyta realized. I know that in the episode 5, it was all about, we dubbed it Karen's Interrupted, and one of the things that kept coming up was like, oh, who are you, if you're Ruby Interrupted? But this is really Hippolyta Interrupted, you know what I mean? And so I'm curious to see, hopefully, where she goes from here.
Yeah, and I thought so that it was really beautiful the way that she, in her freedom, has made some very specific choices when it comes to her family. So after she has gained all that she has gained from these Black women who have built her up, you're right. Like the first time she's screaming her name because she feels silenced. She feels like she's not being heard. She doesn't have to do that anymore. She's gotten out her rage. She's killed all these white people. But now she's in a space where she can actually have she can confront some truths about her family and her role in her family. So she's going and she calls herself Hippolyta, George's wife, and allows her to go and have a conversation that she couldn't have with George when he was alive on Earth before she was able to be in the space that she's in now. And she takes this time to have a difficult conversation with him about shrinking for him and how he let her shrink. And I thought that was so important because we see this on TV quite a bit. On This Is Us, when Beth and Randall were going through their hard time. And I actually ended up writing an article about it. It's called Beth and Randall's Show, How a Good Man Can Still Gaslight You. Because I think this is a very common experience, especially for Black women. If you are married to a man who isn't cheating on you and has a job and loves you and loves your kids, then you're supposed to be content. Like, what's your problem? And George was that guy. And he was a good husband. He was a good father, but he kept Hippolyta small because that meant that he could keep her safe. And I think in a time period too, where Black men were not in positions where they could protect their wives and children from police brutality, from white supremacy and racism in general, keeping them in certain kind of spaces, it helps to ease that pain. So he did allow her to shrink so that he could feel better about not being able to really protect her. And so it was a great conversation for her to be able to have that space. But then also, once they were able to get to this space and he apologized and acknowledged that, she was able to take him with her. And what's really amazing during that scene is that it's a snippet from Sun Ra's film, Space is the Place. And that's an Afrofuturistic science fiction film from 1974. And it's talking about the fact that, we don't exist, we're kind of existing outside of what's real. I mean, if white supremacists are not seeing you, they're not acknowledging you, are you a real person? If you were real, your people wouldn't be seeking equal rights. You don't exist in this society. So like, what's real? If I'm not real, you're not real, and we're being erased by society, how do we even know that we're real? So it's essentially, we're all projections. We're projections from the ancestors is the conclusion that they come to. And that's what's going on in the background as Hippolyta and George are exploring this planet and meeting these aliens and just living outbounded, because it doesn't matter. Like, the limits that they placed on us, they don't get to decide. We get to name ourselves, I think is the point of this. We are naming ourselves. They don't get to decide who we are. And this is what I appreciate about Hippolyta uninterrupted as opposed to Ruby uninterrupted. She's able to dream bigger and imagine more and search for more, whereas Ruby is just in a really stunted place. And Hippolyta is scarred for sure in very similar ways, but she is able to find and untap an imagination beyond what Ruby is able to do with that magic. And I think, again, that's the difference between white magic that we see that Ruby is dealing with and the Black woman genius that Aunjanue Ellis mentioned, and this magic that's happening that is not limited or created by white supremacy for white supremacist purposes.
Yeah, and I think, if we view the two of them together, and the two of them meaning Ruby and Hippolyta, it takes a little bit of the, not pressure, it takes a little bit of the, maybe pressure off of looking at Ruby and Letty as companions. Like, I know there's been a lot of discussion of colorism around the show and about how, Ruby is this full-figured Black woman and Letty is a light-skinned Black woman who's, a more traditional size in terms of our society. But if we look at Ruby and Hippolyta and how they are both operating in this world. I think those are more companions, since they are both, what is the correct word? Not auxiliary characters, but they're both like additional characters to the story. They're not necessarily the
supporting.
Yeah, they're supporting characters. They're not necessarily like the main characters as Tick, Letty, and so if we look at those two women in comparison, like both of them are brown skinned Black women. Both of them are, Ruby is a woman of a certain size. Hippolyta is a woman of a certain age and even a certain size, which it came out in the interview that I really appreciated that we saw her body. And we opened the season with seeing her and George in this really tender but also super sexy like love scene that we never see for people of a certain age either. So I think if we view those two characters together, it's just more interesting to look at those two characters and how they navigate these worlds. Like both of them are marginalized in a way. Like Ruby's marginalized because her sister's not telling her the full story, but yet she's brought into this drama of an issue and she ends up in her own sort of crazy episode, right? Hippolyta is marginalized because her husband is dead, her nephew and his brother are not telling her the truth, and so she gets to experience her own episode and awakening as well. And if we look at both of them as sort of like who is really uninterrupted, I don't think that there's any doubt that even though we've been told that Ruby interrupted, Ruby's claiming her power, Ruby's doing all this other stuff, like she's not doing that because she still doesn't have all the answers. And even though Hippolyta doesn't have all the answers either, she has far more understanding and far more power. And as you mentioned, she's using that power and that understanding to bring other Black people along and bring her family along in a way that Ruby is just not. And so exactly. I'm curious to see how both of these characters, because we see in this episode, Ruby is overhearing these things. And she also knows that magic is real. She also knows that Christina is looking for these papers. And so that's why I still don't trust her. I still don't trust that this is like real Ruby. But, I could be wrong. And we'll see. But on this other end of it, even though Hippolyta is upset, even though Hippolyta is mad, I think she realizes like Tick and Montrose are trying to protect her, even though she may not need their protection. And I think that's something that, sure, Black women want to be protected, Black women want to be cherished, but also Black women can fight. And that's what is brought up in this episode through Hippolyta's character. And so I'm curious to see how that is expanded over the next 4 episodes of the show.
And I think too, we were talking before about, the differences again between the show and the book. Hippolyta in the book, she is gone on the first time that we see Tick. Hippolyta's gone on a guide trip. So it's very, very different than the show. Hippolyta was, pretty empowered in her own right, I guess, in the book. And this was more of a journey for her on the show. And the journey that she had to go through, her husband had to die. He had to get out of the way for her to be able to explore and find herself in this way. And so, I thought that was really interesting too. Tick and Montrose are operating the same way that George did. Like, let me withhold things from her so that she can be safer. Montrose even says, with all the stuff happening that white people already have control over everything, you want us to tell other Black people that white people have magic on their side too. Like it's too much. And I can understand that as well. But with the information, people are empowered and they can choose their life path in a different way. And so, it's a difference between protection that comes from a space of, Black women leading and asking for what we need, and then Black men actually deciding what Black women and Black girls need and doing those things without our agency involved. And I think that's where, George got stuck within his patriarchal actions and Montrose and Tick are kind of stuck in that kind of like toxic masculine behavior as well.
Yeah, and as you mentioned, just about the book, I think Misha Green, the creator, showrunner, has made a lot of adaptations to center Black women. So even though, yes, Hippolyta in the book goes on these guide trips, like from the beginning, she's very adventurous, she's very curious in the same way in the show about astronomy. This particular chapter, this Hippolyta chapter in the book, does not have all of this extra amazing textural details about how Black women empower each other. And so I think that is definitely one of the more positive changes from the book to the show, where, you know, in the book we see Hippolyta going to some observatories and, you know, stepping through this portal, but she doesn't have this level of experience and awakening within herself that is just very, very powerful. And like we mentioned at the beginning, it's just like everything we need for this week, when this week has been so heavy for Black women.
And that's why, because I know how amazing this episode made me feel regarding Hippolyta specifically and how empowered it made me feel, I want that for other people in our community. Like when we say all Black lives matter, like I want Black queer men, dark-skinned Black queer men to look on the show and see themselves and feel loved and represented and cared for by the writers as well. I want trans people to watch this show and feel that same way. You know, I want Two-Spirit people, Indigenous people to be able to watch this show and feel that way as well. And so even if they're not necessarily going to be included in the story, like directly in the characters, that at least there won't be violent and harmful portrayals of them on the show that will make them feel even more marginalized. I think maybe, I don't know. I don't want to say it's a tall order, because I do feel like there is a lot more pressure on Black creatives to be everything for everybody. And I don't think that you necessarily have to be everything for everybody, but I do think there is space and there is obviously talent and ability to make different choices. But I do think, as there are other people that are created in these worlds, that we can be a space that is at least not harmful.
Yeah, and Misha has talked about wanting a season 2, so maybe this, you know, constructive feedback is something that if they are picked up for a second season, or if they do develop another storyline, hopefully that gives them room to go back and have these conversations in the writers' rooms to make sure that they are, you know, including people and checking their biases.
And having those people in the room.
Yeah, and having those people in the room so that they are able to include people's experiences and have everyone see themselves on the screen, which is, I think, one of the things that, you know, as Black women, we always talk about. We want to see ourselves in all of these various stories, but so do other people, so do other marginalized communities. So hopefully that's something that they can take back and actualize. But I think that absolutely brings us to a natural point to the end of our show for this week. We've had a very robust conversation, and we've had a very, very, very amazing, like, I loved talking to Aunjanue Ellis this week.
So
about,
great.
This Hippolyta episode about Black women's rage, about protecting Black women, about Meg the Stallion. I really loved everything about talking about this episode. And before we get out of here, I want to give a couple of shout outs to our listeners. Shout out to Dr. Jen, who's been rocking with us from the very, very, very beginning. She's very active on our Twitter. She always comes in to talk about certain theories. Sis, you were right. They are using the blood of the blood of William and the blood of Dell to shapeshift. So shout out for you for getting it. Shout out to everyone who's given us a 5 5-star rating on whatever platform you listen to, particularly Apple. I happened to go on there the other day to just kind of look, and I was surprised to see we had so many 5-star ratings, because so often it can feel like we're talking into a void in this podcast, but it heartened me to see that people are enjoying this. And this person, I guess it's Lick Dog, who said our podcast is sharp, personal, and in-depth. They also said Black Girl Watching is like a cold, sweet drink that hits the spot. This is just what I was looking for. So we appreciate you for listening. And shout out to also Abby Winters, who left us a review to say our podcast is thorough and thoughtful. And we really appreciate it. So if you are listening, give us a 5-star review on whatever platform you're listening on. If you are on Apple, hit us with a written review. It also helps. If you have any questions, any comments, any whatever, hit us up on Twitter at Black Girl Watching, Instagram at Black Girl Watching, and blackgirlwatching.com. Live tweet with us every episode, and we'll be here. Anything else, bro?
Yeah, one more thing. Abby also suggested, because Britni, last week you said it's dark and hell is hot. That was kind of the lyric that you chose to describe Tick. That we would, choose a lyric that would describe each episode, which I thought was fun. And all I could think about in this episode was Solange. And her album, A Seat at the Table, and the song Mad. I got a lot to be mad about. Our anger is righteous. Our anger is valid. Don't ever let anybody tell you otherwise. Like Black women, we have a lot to be mad about. And expressing that anger and expressing that rage and getting healing from that, there's love in there too. So go give A Seat at the Table a spin and just kind of hopefully get wrapped up in that hug that Solange gave us in 2016 when she dropped that album specifically for us. I also want to mention in the conversation that we were having with Aunjanue Ellis, and she mentioned the article that I wrote. In case people wanted to read it, we'll have that up also on blackgirlwatching.com as well in the notes. The article is called "We Need, quote, slave movies, just not the ones that we're getting." So if you want to find out more about that and how the slave movie genre can be empowering for us, and the reasons why Hollywood has specifically not allowed it to be the powerful genre that it could be, you can check that out on blackgirlwatching.com too.
Yeah, well, that brings us to the end of another episode. I'm Britni Danielle.
I'm Brooke Obie.
Black Girl out.
Free to hate when we must. Free to kill when we must. Free to bring destruction when we must. That is our freedom. That is our prayer. No